2 years ago, I was at a grower's field and I selected a cherry tree. I brought the tree home, planted it in a pot and made a couple of videos of it. One, a little joke, a short, growing bonsai is easy. Just prune away what isn't bonsai. I have known that people do not have humor and do not understand what's going on. So that's why I'm now going to explain it. The short was about this tree. You can see it is a flowering cherry. I am not exactly sure which one. I still need to ask my friend. But what I did at the time, there were a lot of straight stovepipe side branches on it. They were straight, they had no taper, they were too thick to bend, and actually they were quite thick in comparison to the trunk. So I cut them all off and I left little stumps. This way you create taper in your attachment, but at the same time you force the tree to grow lots and lots of young branches. Of course, I could have used some of these branches, particularly the one in the top, because they were nice and thin. They were nice and ramified. However, the problem with trees, they grow up. Upper branches always thicken a lot faster than lower branches. So if you are growing out new lower branches, then there's no alternative than to keep the top in check. Now let's take a closer look here at these cut marks, because some people were worried they will never ever close. This is one of the locations where I took a big branch off, and here is the cut paste, and you can see the callus, or actually the bark, starting to push this out. It has started to heal, and here I can already start to pull the cut paste off. Clean up this wound a little bit, but this is now starting to close. You can see here the edge crawling in. It is going to take another year, maybe 2, for this completely to close, but it is well on its way. The nice thing now is that I have a nice fat base for the branch. I have movement because it goes up and out, and I have multiple branches now to choose from. I don't want branches to grow up and have a very narrow canopy with lots of branches almost vertical. No, I want the branches to be quite wide. That way you get most of the flowers in spring, because that's why you grow these species. There was a question also about the paste that I put on here. Now this is the cut paste that I use. It is very, very liquid. Let me see what I can show you. See? So you have to use only a very, very thin layer of it. Otherwise it will start dripping down, and it takes an hour or so to set, and after that it's waterproof and it doesn't come off. This is a Japanese cut paste. It's often used in azaleas, but it also works quite well on cherries. Callus grows underneath it, pushes it up, and slowly the wound closes. Now, it's early spring. This has been in the pot for 2 years. It has grown the first branches. I am going to prune it back a little bit, but let's have a look quickly at what it looked like over the year. And meanwhile, I'm going to start pulling this out of the pot. There's all new buds forming everywhere. Now it's time to select those buds. And at the same time, I'm going to remove some of the soil. We don't need buds right at the base of the tree. Buds growing down can go, leaving just 2 branches on each point. So the reason for removing some of the soil is that in spring I want to repot this in another pot, and slowly I want to encourage the tree to no longer have roots on top, but to really make lower roots. You can see the roots are growing up a little bit. I don't want that. It's just going to be a little bit of soil that I'm removing, not all that much, but you can already see it has rooted extremely well. Early May, and now you can really tell what's happening. Buds are popping everywhere. The new growth is starting to extend. This little joke, in fact, is actually throwing a bud here and there, but it does look a little bit awkward. So I'm going to just remove that. Let's start. Clean this out. What we can also see is that here callus is starting to push underneath the cut paste. So these wounds are starting to heal, giving me the idea that the big chop that I have in the back here can also be worked on now. I left this earlier on, so I didn't get any dieback on the trunk, but considering all these buds that are here forming on the lower trunk and even there, I think I can now start removing this section. I'll clean up the cut here, flush with the bark. A little bit of space so we can see what's happening. So as you can see, it's a little bit of concave shape. I've left a little bit here to protect the sprout that's growing there. Add cut paste and just let it recover for the rest of the season. Now here it is. I might smoothen out a little bit. On top there's a healthy bud that will push sap flow through here. This bud will make sure there's sap flow down there. So if I remove this, it looks like a much smoother cut already, and I still have good hopes of it completely healing over, maybe by the end of this or next season. So this big trunk, it has a little bud right there, and there's a little bud right on the other side. So I have to work it quite slowly, going piece by piece. Trying to not damage it. And of course I'm using concave cutters, knob cutters in fact, which will help the bark to heal over it later on. And hopefully not leave too big of a scar. Nice and flush with the rest of the trunk. Create a nice little dimple, and the edges flush with the exact trunk, except of course where there's a little bud that you want to protect. All done. And before it dries out, straight away cut paste on top of it. Just a little reminder that these little young sprouts are very sensitive and light, and I was clumsy and I moved my hand and popped this bud off. So I can only hope that it will resprout, and otherwise I just killed off this part of the branch, and I need to work with these here. Here's another little branch that I can remove, but for the rest there's going to be no wiring for the next couple of weeks. I'd love to, but the branches will come off, so it's better to just leave things in place for a little bit longer, let these extend more and get them a little bit stronger. I would say the strategy paid off. Look, these are now quite short, they don't push as hard, and here I'm getting nice long branches. In fact, I'm getting so many branches here, I need to remove a few of these smaller bits and bobs that are growing here in the back. And here I need to thin out a little bit. But besides that, I'm just going to let this grow for a little bit longer before I do any major work on this. Early summer, and the gambling has paid off. This thing is pushing with growth. Even here in the back down low, where I don't really want new growth, there's branches popping everywhere. Places like this I don't need branches. So now you can tell that the branches are turning from green to red, and they're getting a little bit stiffer, which is a really good signal. They're starting to lignify. This is a point that you can wire the tree out using still fairly thin wire. I'm thinking 1.5, maybe 2 millimeters will do. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take off some of the leaves here so that it is easier to wire and there's less pressure. And then I'm just going to leave it alone again for the season. Note, I'm only going to wire the first 10 centimeters or so, because I'm going to trim all of these back at the end of the season. Now if I look at the trunk, this is going to be the first branch, and this is going to be the second branch, but I see there's a branch here in the back, which could also be useful as a second branch. So either this will have to go, or this in the back will have to go. This branch is in a position which is quite illogical, and also because I have this scar here, I'm going to remove this completely. Come on. I might have to clean this out with my knob cutters a little bit. Remove this vertical one and only keep this one. That way I'm limiting the problems. I'm going to wire these two branches now with one piece of wire, 2 millimeters. I hope that's enough. When bending, be very careful, because the attachments are still quite weak. Also the windings of the wire are quite loose, because the branch will expand quite a bit still in the next couple of weeks. And now I can just gently move this around and bend it in place. Similar dilemma here, but this branch grows crossing the main trunk, so this can go, leaving only this branch to be wired and positioned. So that's all there is to be wired, just the first initial parts. The tree has lots of movement, therefore the branches will get lots of movement. It is a flowering cherry, which I'm growing for the flowers, so I'm making very open horizontal structure in this tree. Unfortunately, one of the branches cracked. This is just a sign of impatience on my side. They're still quite herbaceous, and therefore if you bend it too quickly instead of gently, they might snap. Now this is going to go back into the garden. It can grow for the rest of the season. I might once or twice pinch a few growing tips, particularly in the top, because I don't want these to fatten up, I want those to fatten up. But besides that, it's ready for the rest of the season, and we'll see it again later this year. Look at that. 3 weeks have passed. The wire is biting in. It really needs to be removed. The branch is set in place and it is all ready to go for the season. At the same time, what we see here at the base, we see that a new branch has formed, which means that this branch here is probably no longer needed, which would mean that looking from the front, I have a nice side branch coming this direction. I have a big side branch that direction. This one can go, and I have a small back branch here. So let me remove the sprouts already and then get my concave pruners to take off this whole side branch that sits here. The top of the tree I'm going to prune because the branches have gotten long again. I'll prune those back. I'll unwire the whole tree and then just let it go again for the rest of the season, do its thing and be happy. Now there were concerns about the big cuts that I've made, but look at this callus forming here. This is really starting to close over already. Will you look at that extension growth? But I don't need extension growth in the top. I want fine branches, nice ramification. So all these tall branches here, I'm just going to take back again to keep them nice and light. Only the bottom branches are allowed to grow this year. Let's unwire these as well. Now it's been 2 years since I brought this home from the grower's field, and at the time it didn't have all that many roots. Now if you look at the root ball, it's completely solidified, and I am assuming there's a lot of new roots also from the trunk. So I'm going to be quite rough. Yes, again, I'm going to be quite rough. No mercy here. I'm going to completely clean out the root ball, cut back some bigger roots. Right, the root ball is now pretty much cleaned from substrate. One of the things that was very clear is this is the first repot since growing from the field. So here in the core of the root ball, there's still the scent from the field. I've scratched it out a little bit, more will come out later. Then it had a very long one-sided root, which I reduced in the hope that I get more surface roots. I also left here one big root, which basically attaches here, turns around and turns back. Now it has a few nice small roots here. So this root is just going to go, because in the long run it is no good. The tree should be full of energy and should be able to deal with this with no real problems. It is, however, a substantial amount of roots that I'm removing. And what you now can also see is there's another surface root here, and there's all these little roots here on the bark, which hopefully will start growing now that I'm also removing this old soil that still sits here. Look at all these roots coming out here. That's quite nice. Quite a big ending. So this was the cut end of the root when it came from the field. And slowly but surely the root ball will become smaller and smaller. I'll just keep doing this, and then afterwards, of course, I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to prune all these long roots back, right? I can do that quite easily just like this, because most of it is nice and fine. Just removing the beard, and then I'm going to go in and do a cleaner cut. Right. So you can see here at the end, a few quite big cuts were made, also there. This whole section needs to come off at some point, but I want to get a few more roots here. Where is my repotting hook? Here, this root that sits on top starts here. So this I all want to take off over the next 2-3 years. Grinding it down maybe next season, once this has rooted even better. So this is the back of the tree. You see there's actually quite good roots on this side. On the front of the tree, where the crossing root was, not so many. Still a little bit of old soil here. But this is now going to go back into the substrate. I'm going to plant it quite deep if possible. And one of the problems, of course, when people are just beginning with bonsai and they get stuck like this one, is that they don't cut away enough. And you will always be left with stovepipe side branches, taperless trunks, and then after maybe 10 years you decide, I don't like it, I'm going to cut it back further. And as always, don't be too concerned removing branches. If the tree is healthy, it will just backbud, create new branches. Now I'm removing the flowers. It is, after all, in development, and at the time flowers just take energy. This was Jelle with the story of my cherry. I think it is a Sakura flowering cherry. Why I didn't cut off too much, and how I hope that this tree is on its way to become a nice bonsai. Prune back, let it grow, prune back. And in between, work the root ball, and then in maybe 5 years or so from the field, you can have a decent tree in a pot. That's not too shabby. Keep growing bonsai, and I'll see you next time.